So I just got back from the Adirondacks this past weekend. I sound a little different, at least to me, because I don't know. I was wrecked after the Pathfinder's Basics Wilderness Survival course, and I wanted to just take some time and talk about the weekend, talk about the experience, kind of do something of an after action report on what I loved about it, what was crazy about it, what I wish I had known before going, things like that. I had done a fair amount of research before the event, and I think that I was just kind of, generally speaking, my expectation for what it would be was very different than what it was. And I'd say the biggest difference was in the intensity of the weekend in general. And so to kind of set the stage for what I've learned and what I loved, and why I've kind of not been able to stop talking about it, even when I came back in like a zombie-like state, I think it probably make a little bit of sense just to do a quick read through of the some highlights, at least, from what the course is kind of like communicated as, and then the required items, and then we can talk about some of the stuff I brought that was silly because I didn't know. Some of the things that I would recommend the pay extra attention to, things like that. So the Pathfinder Northeast Basic Survival class is 3 days, 2 nights, worth 2.5 CEUs, and it is a patch qualification course. So none of that necessarily meant much to me other than the days and nights. Beyond that, it says that this class is intended to provide students with knowledge to survive a 72-hour emergency scenario using the 10 C's of survivability. Multifunctional kit, demonstrations, first aid situations, firecraft, shelter construction, water collection. Basic does not mean easy, understatement of a lifetime, but it's true. Basic does not mean easy. It means that these are the essential facts, principles of the subject and the skill. Anyway, you can expect to walk 3.3 to 4 miles over the entire course, carrying gear approximately 35 pounds, and other collected woodland materials as needed for your projects. You will complete various timed exercises individually and as part of a team. Each deliverable will be designed to make you more self-reliant. If you don't give up on yourself, we won't give up on you. And we'll also make sure that we can take tasks slower to ensure that you have retained the knowledge. Beyond that, it goes important. It says, like, there's going to be hikes, there are bathrooms located nearby, there's always water. You're eventually going to have to sleep outside in a temporary shelter that you will construct as part of a final exercise. Bring medication if you need it. If you have chronic problems, probably don't do it. And they recommend that you work out leading up to the event. Definitely recommend that as well. And so there's a section on if you finish but you don't earn the patch, or if you quit, what happens there. None of that should be that important. Don't quit, etc., etc. Age requirements, and so, like, I read all that and I didn't necessarily know what to make of the event, right? So it's a 3-day, 2-night survival training. I've watched a ton of YouTube videos. I'm sure you have. If you're seeing this, I've watched, I've read some books on emergency preparedness. I've gone to several hour seminar. It's not the concepts didn't seem like it would be new to me, but I was going for practical application, plus just became a YouTube and Instagram fanboy of Josh Enyart's, because his content was so good and he clearly knows what he's talking about. So I wanted to be there, and I wanted practical application, and I didn't necessarily fire see people make fires all the time. Water collection, I've watched a ton of videos. I know that you're gonna need heat, or you're gonna need disinfecting tabs, or you're gonna need some filtration system. I'm with it intellectually. Map and compass, I know rudimentary. I've taken a course at REI. I have the Sunto MC2. Like, so look, conceptually, I thought that it would be like classes with time, and then some sort of a test environment, and you'd sit around a campfire, and then you'd have lunch, and then you'd sit around a campfire, and then you have dinner. I'll pause there, and I'll move back quickly to the 10 C's. Right, so the 10 C's for this Pathfinder course are cutting tools, combustion devices, cover, cordage, container, compass, cloth, candling device, cargo, tape, and a combination tool. Additionally, they highlight that camping is primitive, tent, hammock. No food is provided, so bring your own food. Electrolyte drinks are recommended, and that there are porta potties located 400 yards from base camp. That's in Ohio. In the Adirondacks, there's a outhouse right there, just a couple, 30 yards away. And then also they note at the bottom that you'll want an all-weather journal, pens and notebooks that are appropriate, appropriate clothes, appropriate hygiene items. Again, food and snacks, because no meals are provided, all medications that you would need. Now, to just kind of double underline some of those needs, right? For me, what I didn't necessarily know was some of the assumed things, like, what good food would look like for this event, because, I imagine camping, and I haven't camped much, and so I brought like rice and oatmeal type things that I thought I'd boil over time and have it and take some time with it. Luckily, just a day or so before the event, I stopped and got some dehydrated food. And what I would say is that if I were to do it again, one of the biggest changes I would make is I'd have a lot more food ready to eat. So I would have, Slim Jim type meat sticks or beef jerky. I would have I would have any protein bars or like ready to go food, because even trying to find time to boil water to then add it to a dehydrated pack actually was kind of hard, right? So like the last night, Saturday night leading into Sunday, our final work was done. Might have been like by the time I was done finding the, so we were camping. We made our own shelters with emergency tarps, which is one of the required items in the cover section of this 10 C's, and so it was really kind of awesome making that, and it was impressive how much heat it retained. But the floor of that shelter is intended to be pine, leaves. We were using hemlock, and you need enough pine that when you lay on it, there's still 4 inches of compressed pine below you. Things like we started looking for pine at what might have been like midnight or right around there, and so it's like there's this weird balance between how much time am I going to put into finding pine. All I want to do is sleep. I've spent this whole day with like a 40-pound bag on my back, walking through snow that was hip high, sometimes higher, sometimes lower. I was completely smoked out. All I wanted to do was lay down, but it was so cold. I was pretty hungry. And you make sacrifices on how many pine boughs you get to lay the floor of your shelter, and that could end up nipping me in the butt. So what I would say is, if I was less hungry, I probably would have spent a little bit more time collecting pine. I would have been hypothetically less hungry if I had had more snacks that I could have just reached into my bag and just started eating while out on these walks that last about 3 hours. And so the food section, not necessarily crystal clear on what good food looks like. I would say dehydrated food, or food that is pretty much ready to eat, just when you grab it out and is accessible, full stop on anything else. There's not a lot of time to cook. In terms of knives, the recommended makes perfect sense to me. I learned that the bacho Laplander, which I have, is good. Cuts on the, pull and push, but it seemed that the silky was a much stronger saw on processing wood. Seems like a toss-up, not necessarily essential. On the combustion devices, you really need to show up with every type of combustion device and the ones that they recommend. You're tested on all of them. I had seen somewhere on the internet that there's a magnifying section of the MC2 compass, which could, create a fire. Turns out you need absolutely crystal clear, ideal circumstances for that fire to actually happen. And so I was having a very hard time creating a fire with a magnifying lens. Luckily, I was able to borrow a partner's, and that allowed me to pass that deliverable. But it's an easy pickup, one in hindsight that I would have made. They have them on Self-Reliance Outfitters, they have them on Amazon. You probably don't need 7X, 5X would have done, but I think the one on the compass that I have is like 1X, and that definitely didn't cut it. So I would just make sure you show up with all the ways to create fire that they recommend. As for the drum liners, so for the cover section, there's 6 recommended 6 mil 55-gallon drum liners, and at the hardware store around the corner there's 40-something gallon construction garbage bags, which were 3 mil thick, and so I went with those because the 6 mil liners that I found were on like Uline, and it was like 200 of them, and I didn't need 200 6 mil 55-gallon drum liners that I was aware of. And in hindsight, I probably would have found a way, probably through Self-Reliance Outfitters, to buy 4 6 mil 55-gallon drum liners, because at the end of the day, when I would fill my garbage bags up, sticks would poke through. I ended up doubling up my bags. I'd put a fresh bag inside of the previously ripped bag, and that helped a little bit. But even then, the volume does really matter, because you end up going through a ton of small wood in the fire making activities, and the bigger the bag is, the more hemlock or pine you can gather for the base of your shelter when you finally need to do that. Hindsight, I would have definitely got a bigger series of garbage bags. The other thought on the cover is they say 1 queen size blanket or 2 twins. I went to a local Army Navy and got a surplus twin, and then I got it was a 70-30 surplus twin. I believe Rothco made it. And then I got a Self-Reliance Outfitters 90-10 wool. Both of these are wool twin blanket, and Self-Reliance Outfitters I think was also just a Rothco blanket. The 90-10 feels a lot better. I washed them both twice before the event. Left them out to breathe in the air. They still had a little bit of this like anti flam, like they treat it so that it doesn't catch fire as easily, but it smells a little funky. Got rid of as much of that as I could before the event. In hindsight, I probably would have just bought a queen size wool blanket. It was really cold in the middle of the night, and I didn't necessarily know the best way to wrap up in these 2 twins. The first night I was just freezing cold. I like to sleep on my back. I like to sleep like long. And it's just entirely too much surface area. So when you try and ball up, you end up catching cold spots unless you're doing a good job. I went with you know, a square approach to the blanket and kind of try to burrito myself in it. If I could go back, I might have done kind of like an overlapping two rectangles, pulled one over, pulled the other in the other direction, and seen how that went. But in reality, I think transitioning to like a diamond with a queen, wrapping the bottom up over your feet, then burritoing, and then pulling the top over, just would have been like probably a lot better. Hard to say, but yeah, I felt very cold. I thought that I was amazed at how well wool blankets work, but we had, like, you know, sub-freezing weathers in the middle of the night, and there was almost nothing I could do to keep as warm as you would, you know, ideally like to be. That said, the one night in our personal shelters, the ones that we made, was a warmer night than in the kind of admin building that we spent the night before that was fully tarped out. So there's a lesson there, I guess, that the shelter was somehow better, despite thinking, I still think that the queen size blankets would have been better. Okay, full stop. Beyond that, power cord. I think I think that I bought the hype on the Titan Survivor cord, and I think that it is great, right? The idea of having the jute inside and the fishing line and the you know, little copper wire, like, that's all clearly valuable and helpful. Just in a lot of the applications in this specific course, it seemed actually to almost be detrimental, meaning, like, the stuff that we had to use, like when making the tarp shelter, for example, right, like, you need to have the ability to crank down on the wire to create a ridge line that is very tight, and because of that extra material inside of the paracord and the Survivor cord, it just, you kind of like twist it up, and it would not work as well as just regular paracord. And then because the specifically on this event, the weather was so kind of gnarly with all the snow, and there isn't a listed, you know, snowshoes, in part because you know, the Adirondacks are generally new on this curriculum, and if there wasn't snow and you bought snowshoes, I can understand that being a headache. So we improvised snowshoes with pine boughs, and, you know, the hemlock leaves again show up. But tying those babies down with the Survivor cord, again, because that inside wires and the fishing cord, like, it just wasn't, regular warrior cord from Titan Survival would have been a better cordage for this specific event. Standard 550 cord would have been better cordage as well. So that was my big takeaway on the cordage side. Beyond that, a cooking container, honestly, less is more is what I realized. So just the 32-ounce bottle and a nesting cup is really all you need for this. I brought all sorts of other stuff. I brought a char tin, I brought a fire kit, I brought a coffee cup, a mid-size cup, I brought a, you know, a liter container, partly because it came in this set kind of all together. I bought it all at once, and I have very little experience out there, so it just kind of, there was titanium, which is sweet and light, so I figured pack it, right? The more you know, the less you carry. The less you know, the more you carry. I carried it all. I wouldn't next time. I'd probably just bring the 32-ounce container, probably just bring a nesting cup. Potentially, my setup on the nesting cup is I have maybe 2 cups. So I have the 32-ounce container. I have a larger container that fits inside of my kind of Molly edition. I go container, I put my 32-ounce inside, and then I put a coffee cup on top. And I did like having a coffee cup that wasn't as charred out and as piney as the 32-ounce container and the larger container that I used for charring. So maybe just those 3 things I would have brought. Compass, you know, the Sunto MC2 was awesome for me. I made Ranger paste beads, also great. We use a lot of terrain to guide the navigation. Pace count wasn't as essential for us, but it was very cool to actually learn that and get to use Ranger beads for the first time. As for char cloth, I think the shemagh was one of the most helpful things that I had. I brought 2. I used it to help pick up extra leaves and kindling and all sorts of stuff. You could bind. I think the shemagh was a great fit. The scrap material is, I imagine, for making char material. We didn't necessarily need it or use it. Number 14 sail needle wasn't critical for our weekend. I had a slightly smaller needle. It worked just fine for me. I went out with it pre-threaded with some bank line, and I would recommend that as well. As for kindling device, the better the headlamp you can bring, the better you do a lot of nighttime work. And I had no idea how dark it could be, full stop. But I used a black diamond, and it was 300 lumen, and it was very, very helpful in the nighttime navigation. Beyond that, Gorilla Tape. Do you need a whole entire roll? Probably not. Probably not. So some portion of a roll the roll on something that can be rolled. It's more of a way to fix things, and you learn some of those applications. But I don't think you need a full size roll of duct tape. And then a multi-tool, Leatherman's great. I've seen that having a tool with an awl to help you kind of stitch or do some of fixing could be more helpful. So my Leatherman wave was good, and it was adequate. And I'll stop there. Hygiene items, I didn't know necessarily what to bring. What I realized was that in the winter, it was very, very cold, and it wasn't like you're taking showers. It wasn't like you wanted to even take layers off to deodorize. I brought a towel. I wiped myself. Toothbrush was a saving grace, but that's kind of it. Toothpaste. Yeah, so in terms of the kit, in terms of the way they described it, those are the quick notes as we go through it. And then I would just say, like, to talk about the weekend in total, it was just, I used the term intense at the start of this, and I really think that it was intense, right? So in terms of the way that they describe it, right, it's a 72-hour, I want to make sure I'm using the right language, provide students with the knowledge to survive a 72-hour emergency scenario. And an essential part of the knowledge to survive a 72-hour emergency scenario is a survivor's mindset. And I think that is the part that I wasn't expecting, right? So this whole thing is in some ways meant to replicate the level of stress you might feel in an actual 72-hour survival scenario. Granted, we had plenty of laughs, and there was some downtime, and we bonded, and it was excellent. Like, I loved it. It was a weekend that I would go back to for sure. It was also incredibly hard. The climate did not do us any favors with the depth of the snow and the type of terrain that we were walking on, but the curveball for me that I wasn't expecting was just the intensity of the entire event, as it is intending to model the intensity that you might need to bring to actually trying to survive. What I will underscore, and I find really important, because I've really kind of kept thinking about it since Friday night when it actually happened, was we were spending a lot of time on fires. One of the types of fires that we were going to make is a single stick fire, right? So we were taking a piece of wood maybe about this wide, 3 to 4 inches long, and you're going to baton it down and break it into smaller and smaller bits, and then create fire sticks. YouTube is, and Instagram is full of fire sticks. But it was a very long day. It was freezing cold. And I live in Brooklyn, and I've watched YouTube videos on fire sticks. Never made a fire stick. Turns out, in the middle of the night, after a long day, making your first fire sticks is actually really freaking hard. And I don't know exactly how long it took. There were 4 of us there. 3 of us had to spend over an hour attempting to make a single stick fire. It was well past midnight by the time the 3 of us finished. And personally, I've never been so, on the entire weekend, I was never so close as to just saying, I'm done with this. I get it. I can't do it today in this scenario. This is something I'll just bring home and practice. I was never so close to quitting than in that moment and in that product or project on that deliverable. But what they also say here is that if you don't give up on yourself, we won't give up on you. And I kept thinking about that, and honestly, like, my back was breaking. I was on the, I was kneeling on the ground. I was sitting on the, I got up, I stretched for a second, thought about it, said, just breathe. You're probably trying too hard. I went back, tried a little bit less, made a couple feathers that looked actually like feathers. And with Joshua's support, he said, I think you're actually ready to go. Throw some sparks on it. And we got it to work well after midnight on Friday, the first night. And I loved that. I loved that they didn't quit. I loved that Joshua didn't quit on me or, my classmates. I was definitely pushed well further than I ever would have gone on my own. A, just physically, B, also like mentally. I think there's a level of tax for me that I'm just not familiar with. We worked well into midnight until the wee hours of the morning, probably because of just how difficult our terrain was. I don't know if that's normal, but we were fully smoked, and I'm grateful for it. And so with that, what I'd say to anyone who's like thinking about doing the Pathfinder basics, it's just, bring what they tell you to bring, but also bring a very focused mind that says, I'm going to complete this. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to learn. This is a choice that you're getting to make now with these really nice guardrails up of instructors and teammates and partners and people around who all really want you to win. And to me, that's as good of a environment as I could hope to be in. So I've got a relatively long time here, but I wanted to make sure that you, A, knew what I read on the website, had a sense of what I was thinking, heard my packing notes. I brought entirely too much. I had a sleeping bag when I showed up. I had a closed cell foam mat. I had an extra tarp. I had all sorts of additional fire starters and a fire kit. I had all sorts of waterproof bags, and I had food that I couldn't have enough time to cook, and I had extra clothes as though I was going to change clothes every day. I would bring as little as possible, know that it's going to get dirty, have strategies for if it gets wet, because on both the Saturday and Sunday you wear your bag the entire time, and that really every ounce, every pound matters at that point. I only picked up on how important that would be while living through the event. Missed it in the writing itself. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them below. I can expand on anything I've talked about here. I can actually show you what I brought. I can, you tell me whatever's helpful, but I 100% recommend classes with Joshua Enyart. I recommend the Pathfinder Basic. I look forward to doing the Flint and Steel Basic, and potentially even leveling up to the Intermediate. What I would say is that I'm going to put a little bit more practice practical application of these skills in play before showing up to anything more challenging than what I just did. So thank you, and thank you Josh, and thank you Pathfinder School, Flint and Steel. Loved it. 2 thumbs up from me. It is a type of fun that is only fun after the fact, but I'm very, very thankful for the experience. Look forward to future courses.